and get started. Eric, do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Hi, yeah, I'll just offer some brief initial words and then turn it over to Jessica to take us through the bulk of the introductions. But my name is Eric Echtel. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights. We're meeting today to talk about the Clear Lake hitch and some actions and just general concepts that can be discussed and offered forward in an effort to preserve this species and preserve a part of California and kind of, everybody's natural heritage. The hitch is very close to extinction, and without some clear steps and actions in the near future, we could be in a place that California hasn't been for 50 years with the loss of one of its endemic species. So again, thank you to everybody for coming today. Thank you for listening. Jessica is going to run through some ground rules. I want to note that, again, thank you for the patience with the technical difficulties, and we will have another listening session planned for February 1st, and we'll work on our end to make sure that those technical difficulties are cleared up front. But again, thank you for participating. Thank you for being courteous and kind as we embark on this discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica. Jessica, thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Yes, again, our apologies for that. I do want to kind of let you know the plan for today's listening session. So we are going to have some of our staff do a presentation, and then we'll have the bulk of our session set aside to do just open question and answer, comment, discussion session for us. So the first thing I want to mention is that our primary speakers today are going to be Val Zimmer, who's with us. Val's camera's on, so you should be able to see her, and then John Murphy, and I'll be doing a little bit myself, but the two of them are going to be the primary presenters today. And in terms of just going over some logistics for folks, if you do have any comments or questions during the meeting or the session, we are using the chat feature. So we encourage you to go ahead and chat us your questions, particularly during the staff presentation. We're not planning to stop to do discussions during the presentation. We'll be keeping it to the end. But if you have questions that come up while staff are talking, please feel free to chat those in, and we may be able to just answer them easily in the chat while that's happening, or we might go ahead and wait until after the presentation to group those together so that we can have discussions on certain topics, just depending on what's coming in. When we do get to the end, this is not a traditional board meeting. If you've ever been to those where you're limited to 3 minutes, we do want it to be more of a discussion, and so you'll be able to ask questions and ask follow-up questions and weigh in on different topics. That being said, when you're making comments or you're providing input, we just do ask that you remember to be respectful. We have a lot of people here today with differing opinions, but ultimately we are all here to help the hitch. And so, our intention is not to have a debate here, but really to have the opportunity to hear lots of points of view and lots of explore many options and solutions. So just keeping that in mind. We also have a number of other staff on the call today from within the State Water Board and the Regional Water Board. And I call that out because we want to just make sure that folks understand that we're taking this issue very seriously. And so we have a lot of folks here today to listen in so we can hear from all of you. I was also going to tell you that if you have technical assistance problems, you can email the Clear Lake Hitch at waterboards.ca.gov email, but most of you probably already did that because we already had some technical difficulties. So again, thank you for helping us with that. Okay, next slide, please. And one more. Thank you. So before I pass it off to Val and John to really get into the details of our work, I do want to give you an overview briefly of the California Water Boards so that you understand who we are and what we are here to do today. And so the California Water Boards is comprised of 1 state water board and 9 regional water boards. They're outlined in the map here. We're all housed under the California Environmental Protection Agency. And the state board sets statewide policy and supports the regional boards who develop and regulate regional water quality objectives. The state board also permits and regulates public drinking water systems. We have 26 different offices throughout the state that do that. We administer California's water rights system, and that includes issuing permits to use surface water, enforcing those permits. We also curtail water use during emergency drought situations, and we're also responsible for protecting public trust resources like flows for fisheries. We also provide financial and technical assistance for a variety of projects, things like drinking water system construction or water recycling facilities. There's a lot of other things like that. So we have a pretty broad area. If we want to go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of our work in Lake County in general, most of the water board's work so far has been in the Clear Lake area has been through our Central Valley Regional Board, which we have some representatives from there today. And they have been doing work on total maximum daily loads or TMDLs, the irrigated lands program and waste discharge requirements, and then also participating in the Blue Ribbon panel. So the bulk of us here today for this listening session are from our Division of Water Rights, and we are primarily responsible for administering water rights, and that includes managing flows. And so many of you that are joining us today are already aware of the situation, but really the Division of Water Rights was pretty recently made aware of the problem at the early December tribal summit on the emergency problem with the hitch. And so since then, we've been working very quickly to come up to speed and redirect resources so that we can prevent extinction of the hitch. And really, we need your help with that. And that's why we're here today. So we're hosting this listening session and another one. And then we're also meeting with a lot of groups individually to share what we understand about the situation and look for opportunities to collaborate and then explore a path forward for helping the hitch. Next slide, please. So just in case anyone here is new to the situation, the Clear Lake hitch is a large minnow. It's about 12 to 14 inches long, weighs about a pound, and it looks like it has about a 6-year lifespan, and it is only found in Clear Lake and its tributary creeks. The hitch is culturally and ecologically important to local tribes and the lake's food chain, and it spawns and rears in the spring. It takes juvenile fish about 14 days to hatch and return to the lake, and it's important to note that that doesn't mean there's a 14-day spawning and rearing cycle. It just means that once an egg hatches, that's the amount of time. So you could have fish, adult fish coming in and migrating for a long time prior to that. And at one point, the hitch likely numbered in the millions. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to Val to talk about the issue and some of the data that we're aware of. Next slide, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Val Zimmer. I'm with the State Water Board, and I am probably going to be the main technical and data lead on this project. And I'm going to go through some of the very basic high-level overview of what we're doing. I will say I know a lot of you have data and have a lot of observations, and we are looking at all of it. And I think, you know, the devil's in the details with some of this stuff. So I do appreciate all of the input that people have given to us. But I'm going to start with, like, why are we worried about this? You know, I would say that there is widespread agreement that the hitch have been in decline for a long time, right? This is not something that only one group or one set of people are saying. You know, we're hearing this from the tribes, we're hearing this from the farmers, we're hearing this from people who are local. I think everyone can remember a time, you know, if you've been there a long time, when you could go down to the creeks and you would see these hitch spawning in great numbers. You know, we've heard stories of people going out to the creek and collecting buckets of hitch. And those people who are older, the elders, would talk about times when they, you know, they lived on these fish. They depended on them for survival. That's not happening today. And so, you know, that's a concern. But I think something else that really got our attention is this graph. And some of you have seen this already. This is from the USGS. They have been out in the lake surveying for hitch since 2017. And the 2017 data are on the top. And what you see is that On the left side, it's the size of the fish, basically. On the left side are small fish, and on the right side are large fish, and that's a proxy for age. Juveniles are small, adults are larger. Like us, they grow bigger as they get older. And in 2017, there was a pretty healthy population of juveniles, and there were some adults. And so, okay, that's what the population looks like to start with. As we move into 2018, what we see is the next year's survey didn't really catch that many juveniles, but you can see that population that they had seen the year before is still there. They've now grown into adulthood. They're a little bit bigger. They're still there. They're in the lake and they're being caught. Where we start getting concerned is that as we start stepping down through 2019, 2020 is missing, 2021 and 2022, we see fewer and fewer adults at the same time as we're seeing no juveniles. You know, in 2022, they only caught 6 fish in all of their surveys. So, you know, this looks like the population is crashing right now. And the fish has approximately a 6-year life cycle. If you do the math, you'll realize they probably haven't had a good recruitment since 2017. And if they don't have one this year, that might be it, right? We might not see the hitch come back at all. So, you know, this is why we're really worried, and this is something that, you know, unfortunately we are late to this issue. You know, I think some folks have been working on this for a long time, and unfortunately we just sort of caught on now. But we have caught on, and we are going to be working on this and working with all of you to do something about this. We hope. Next slide, please. So why? I guess that's right. That's the big question. Why are the hitch crashing? Why now? And I will say we're very aware that there isn't a single issue, right? There's no single cause, no single person who's responsible for the widespread collapse of the ecology or in the fish population. But we do know that it's due to human activity, right? There is the drought, but absent human activity, I think things would be a lot better. You know, we know that there are flow barriers, that the fish perhaps can't get into the stream, or maybe even worse, can't get out, where they come in the spring when there's a lot of water, and then the water drops out in the time that the eggs take to hatch. And when the juveniles try to go back to the lake, they can't get around these barriers. These could be culverts, these could be gravel sort of building up behind roads. There could be stream bed alterations associated with diversions. There could be dams. There are lots of things. And again, this is something that we're hearing from a lot of different people, that this is an issue, and we're going to be looking into this. Similarly, we're also hearing that there's not as much flow, not as much water. And, you know, again, that's related to the drought, that could be related to diversions, and it could be related to the stream coming into the basin, and the groundwater table is a little bit lower than maybe it was in the past. And the stream, instead of just flowing out to the lake, maybe loses some flow to the groundwater. There's been habitat degradation, right? There's been mining, land use changes. Perhaps there's not as much rearing habitat along the lake. There's been some levee development that has caused some of these areas to flow backwards, and that's not natural. There's predation and competition with invasive species. You know, fish eat each other. And then, of course, there are pollution issues, those associated with mercury and harmful algal blooms in the lake in particular. So these are all issues that are affecting the itch. But one thing to remember is, you know, if there's no water in the creeks, then none of this other stuff matters, right? So if the fish can't reproduce, then they're not going to survive. And so it seems that the first thing we need to do here is make sure that there's water in the creeks for these fish. And that's something we're looking very carefully at, and we are the water board, so that is something that, you know, is in our jurisdiction. But, you know, again, like, this isn't a single cause, but we can't keep doing this. We have to put a stop to some of these issues and try to sort of have this fish recover, and hopefully in harmony with some of the other things that go on in Clear Lake. Okay, so let's continue on. Next slide, please. So this is another story that we're hearing, again, from the fish biologists. There are folks that go into the streams who have found fish stranded in pools. You know, these are fish that got upstream, that spawned, the eggs hatched, and the juveniles are kind of stuck and they can't get out. And as the summer progresses, these fish, the streams dry up and the fish die. So this is a picture of, of a bunch of fish that were in a creek that succumbed to a drying creek. And what's really notable about this is that a week before, this creek was running really high. This is Adobe Creek. It was running so high that the biologists couldn't get into the creek to rescue these fish, which was something they were thinking about doing. And I've looked at the data on Kelsey Creek, which is an adjacent creek, for that time period. And I can tell you that, yes, the creeks were running high a week before this happened. And not only that, but the creeks in the mountains, they weren't dry when this happened. So why in the basin do we see creeks drying up at a time when we know that there's flow in the mountains? That's a question we're asking. So yeah, this is something that we are also very concerned about. And again, if there's a way to get these fish out before this happens, that's something we want to see done. Next slide, please. We're also hearing other stories, right? These are things that we're hearing from a few people. They may not be widely agreed upon. We're hearing that there may be illegal diversions in some of these creeks. Maybe that's causing some of the problem. We're hearing issues potentially with cannabis. We've heard allegations that pumps are being turned on too early, maybe when they're not needed for irrigation or for frost protection. I mean, there are variations in how people operate their farms, and maybe that's true, maybe that's not true, but that's something we're hearing, and we need to look into it. We're hearing that water is over allocated. That's probably not a surprise. And then groundwater, right? We know that there are a lot of wells in the county. How many of those wells are active and in these critical areas is still something we're looking into. But we think that there could be around 1,000 wells around Clear Lake that are active. We know that most of the water supply is for agriculture, especially in Big Valley. That's from the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And what we don't know is what are the pumping rates and how close are these wells to the streams. There's a lot of data gaps. There's a lot we don't know. But I will say this, I think we can assume that if you are growing a crop, that you have a well somewhere. And even if we don't know exactly how many wells there are, we know that there are wells. And so that's something we're also looking into. Anyway, all of these issues are being investigated as potential causes and also as potential things that we can target to fix. So next slide. So we've also been looking at where exactly do we need to focus? And this is something that is being discussed with fish biologists, like where are we seeing spawning behavior and recruitment issues, and where do we need to focus our efforts on fixing problems? We've heard that there are two major areas. One is, in the north, we have Middle Creek and its tributary, Scott Creek. We know that the fish do get upstream pretty high in Middle and Scott Creek, and have been found, I think it was 12 kilometers from the outlet in recent years. We also are looking down at Big Valley. This is Kelsey Creek, Clear Lake Basin. And you can see there are 4 streams of interest. The reason the fish don't get farther up in these creeks is due to barriers, right? They can't get past something that's blocking their passage. So these creeks historically used to have a lot of fish in them, and they don't right now. But this kind of gives you an idea of where we are focusing. We'll be focusing our efforts. And as I start talking about other data sets, I will say that as time goes on, we'll be refining our numbers and our analyses to areas probably around these creeks. And I'll say not just the areas next to the lake, but upstream of these creeks as well. Anything that sort of leads into these creeks. Okay, next slide, please. So one question is how many surface water diversions are there? What I'm showing here is a map of the known locations of surface water diversions. This is from our own databases. The colors indicate the use, and the size indicates the size of the diversion as reported to us in 2021. This is not the size of the diversion, hypothetically, in a really big water year, but this is what people are using during the drought, when it's dry. And you can see that a lot of the use is irrigation, that's the green. The light blues are irrigation and frost protection, and then the dark blues are stock ponds. And then you see a little bit of other stuff, right? We see a little bit of municipal, a little bit of domestic, and then others are usually recreational ponds, that kind of thing. And so this gives you an idea that we do know there are some surface water diversions. It's not zero, but it's also not everything. Okay, let's, one of the things, just going to say, one of the things that we might be looking into is if folks are relying on surface water in some of these critical creeks, we want to know, is there a way that we can switch them to another form of water diversion? Maybe they need a pond if they don't have one, that kind of thing. So that's sort of how we might go with focusing our efforts. Okay, next slide. The question also comes up, are any of these surface water diversions doing frost protection? Frost protection, I'm taking a step back. For those of you who don't know, when crops start to bud out, they are vulnerable to freezing events, right? If you have young buds on your vines or in your orchard and they get frozen, your crop will die and you will not be able to have an economic production of pears or walnuts or grapes that year. And so this is a big deal, right? Farmers can't afford to lose their crop. And so there are multiple ways that they protect their crop against frost. One of the most effective ways is to divert water onto the crops. This has the effect of requiring the cold air to freeze all of the water before it can really damage the plant. Freezing water actually takes a lot of energy. And so just having a bunch of wet plants or wet soil has the effect of protecting the crops from that freezing event, and those crops will survive. And so this is something that goes on in the spring, and it goes on at kind of the same time that the hitch are running, particularly when the hitch are trying to get out. Or, the crops, they might not need that until April, but the juveniles might be trying to get out of the creeks in April at the same time that the creeks are dropping from their winter rains. And so it does seem that there's some overlap between potential frost diversions and fish migration. What we see are surface water diversions. Again, the red ones are ones that they explicitly say, yes, we do frost protection on our crops from surface water. We know this. The oranges are areas where somebody is reporting spring diversions. In some of these areas, these folks have reported spring diversions in recent years, in 2021 and 2022. So I don't know that they are for sure diverting water for frost, but they might be. And so again, these are folks that we might want to have a conversation with. Can we get them a pond? Is there something that we can do that's an alternative, like a fan or another method of keeping the crops protected? And I'm not just saying we're going to come down with some kind of an enforcement issue. We will be looking at, like, can we help? Can we help you get funding or point you toward funding for these kinds of things? So that's why this is important. Next slide, please. This is a land use inventory published by DWR. This is the 2019 version. These data were collected sometime between 2014 and 2019. And it basically shows an overview of what sorts of things are happening on the landscape. Purple is vineyards. Red, that's fruit and nut trees. And then there's a few other uses kind of thrown in there here and there. But what I do see is that it does look like the crops dominate the landscape in this area. And how much? What are the numbers? We have 10,000 acres of vineyards, 7,000 acres of fruit and nuts, 3,000 acres of pasture. So that's what's going on. The question also gets asked, how much has this changed over time? That's something we're looking into. I don't know exactly how much it's changed. We do know that vineyard development has started in the late 1960s. I don't know that there's been a tremendous amount of new vineyards that have gone in the last 5 years, during the time of the population crash. But I also think it depends on where you look. If down in Big Valley, I think I'll acknowledge that a lot of these vineyards are well established and have been there a long time. But when you start looking a little farther afield, some of these areas are in the headwaters of these creeks that are critical. Those vineyards are newer, and we are trying to get a handle on exactly how new. It's not an easy data problem because as time goes on, our satellites get better, our aerial photography gets better, and we get better resolution on what's going on. Stuff that was surveyed in the late 90s might be very low resolution and might be hard to sort of parse out exactly how many acres and compare that to what we have today. But that is something we're looking at. And again, we also are not looking at the entire county, right? There are some reports that have circulated that showed the growth of wells and vineyards in Lake County, and we want to be very clear that we're focusing on the areas that are important to the hitch, and that we are looking at active wells, not just all of the wells. But we do know that new wells have been drilled. And I think the other thing that's important to note is, no, we don't know exactly where all the wells are. We're working on that. But the default assumption is that every single one of these fields has a well. And if we don't know where the well is, it's possible that that well is in the creek. And because we know that a great place to put a well is basically right next to the creek. And so we know that there's a high interaction with the groundwater in some areas due to the gravel. So if there are wells that are right next to the creek, they might be having an effect on the creek. If there are wells that are farther away from the creek, that are deeper, they might not be having an effect. And so, this is a situation where data are really important, and we will be asking folks for their help in letting us know, if your well is super deep and you're 2 miles from any of these creeks, you're probably right when you tell me that you don't have an immediate effect on the groundwater. But we don't know. And until we do know, that's something that is going to be hard to assess. We also look at agriculture as potentially being part of the solution. So I don't want to just sort of be really negative here, because I do think that agriculture can be a really strong partner. Some folks have offered to pump water into the creeks, maybe to get the fish moving. Maybe if there is a problem developing where they are getting stranded, some folks have offered to actually put some water down the creeks, and hopefully those fish will move into the lake. That would be fantastic. Another way that agricultural could potentially be helping is looking at their properties and looking for those barriers. Like, is there a road crossing? Is there a structure? Is your diversion structure? Does it have fish passes? That kind of thing. Can you maintain the channel? And I know there are a lot of questions about permitting around that. We'll be addressing that, but we do sort of look at agriculture as a potential partner in the solution. And also monitoring, right? If something is developing, we'd like to know about it. So, if you see a problem, if you see fish getting stranded, it would be fantastic. You guys are out there every day. We want to hear about it. So that's how we sort of view the potential solutions going forward. Okay, next slide, please. And I'm going to pass this along to John to start talking about what it is we're doing now and in the long term.
Great, thanks, Val. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Murphy. I'm a senior engineering geologist in the enforcement unit with the Division of Water Rights at the Water Board. So of course, I'll be interested in the enforcement angle of things in this project. But so far in the presentation, both Jessica and Val have kind of conveyed everything we've learned so far in the past just 4 to 6 weeks. It's been kind of a crash course on all things Clear Lake and the Clear Lake hitch. So we're still learning. But at the end of the day, we know that the hitch is in trouble. There's some dire consequences if the hitch were to go extinct, and we don't want that happening on our watch. So we want to do everything we can to protect the hitch and create long-term solutions that will be viable to protect the hitch moving forward. So at this point in the presentation, we're going to switch gears a little bit. Instead of talking about everything we've learned so far, we're going to talk about what we are looking to do in the near and the long term. So as a regulatory agency, developing regulations takes time, takes a lot of data. We have to convince a board before it can go into effect, and then it takes time to implement, assess compliance, and enforce. So we're not going to be able to get any sort of regulations in place within a month or so. So there's some short-term solutions and some long-term solutions. So in the short term, and kind of happening all the time in the background, are these categories here. So we have enforcement, we have voluntary actions, data, collaboration, and regulations. So there's kind of 5 categories, short-term, long-term solutions here, and I'll go into more detail in future slides on each of these bullet items. But just big picture point, enforcement. So in the water rights world, enforcement is making sure all water diversions are legal and enforcing when there are illegal diversions. Voluntary actions, so things like this, making sure the community is aware of the problem and doing everything they can today to protect the hitch and keep water in key tributaries during the hitch spawning season. And as Val touched on quite a bit, we have a lot of data we've obtained in the past month or so, but there's still quite a bit more data we need. So collaborating on data collection and moving forward with data assessment, filtering, and analysis is going to be a big part of this project for us. And collaboration. So we're hoping to build a really collaborative environment here with members of the community, stakeholders and groups, as well as other agencies, other state agencies, other federal agencies, to collaborate not only on data collection, but possibly enforcement, and short and long-term solutions, and kind of bring everybody to the table. But as I said, we are a regulatory agency, so we are looking at regulations and sort of long-term solutions that can be implemented as we move forward and evaluate the data and see what's viable. So next slide, please. So these are kind of the tools that we have. And I'll start off with the enforcement world here, which my unit is going to be taking most of the charge of. So in California, water rights are very complicated, but essentially an individual cannot own water in California. So water belongs to the people of California. That being said, you are allowed to use water for what we call beneficial uses, designated beneficial purposes codified in law. And to obtain that, you go through the Division of Water Rights to get a permit or a license or registration. We have lots of terms based on the size of the diversion. But there is a process to go through to obtain a water right. However, when we started reaching out to members of the community and multiple stakeholders, what we're hearing from everybody is that there are a lot of illegal diversions. So in the enforcement world, a lot of our work is pretty complaint driven. And so for us to act on illegal diversions, we need to become aware of those. And so for those on the call or the Zoom call today, if you are aware of illegal diversions, please let us know. Things we need are, we need evidence or documentation, location, why you think it's an illegal diversion, and we'll take a look. There's a lot of things we can do both desktop and field investigation wise to take a closer look at potentially illegal diversions. So we'll be kind of doing that in the background when all the other project activities are moving forward. There's also in Lake County, we know there's both legal and illegal cannabis grows and cultivation. So we have a cannabis enforcement group that's separate from my unit. That's going to be taking a look at some of the cannabis activities throughout Lake County. Also in California, not only to divert water, but you also need a water right or permit for storage of water. It's also handled with the Division of Water Rights. So not all reservoirs and water storage areas may be legal. So we're going to be assessing compliance for water storage areas. And also, if you do have a water right, there are reporting requirements for most water rights anyway, that you have to submit to the water board every year. So we're going to be assessing compliance with reporting requirements based on your water right. And not everything's going to be in our purview. We've talked a bit about fish passage barriers. That's going to be more California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we're going to be collaborating with other state agencies that have jurisdiction over some of these issues and enforcement actions. Next slide, please. So as we've said a few times, we're not able to implement any sort of regulatory action within the next 2 weeks or so by February when the spawning season starts. So we're really going to be relying on the community to implement voluntary actions to try to keep water in key tributaries this spring and even into the summer. Fortunately, with the rains that we've had the past few weeks, maybe we'll get a bit of a buffer or reprieve, so it won't be as tall of an order this year. That being said, these are a few bullet items here of some voluntary actions, possibly reducing diversions or pumping, especially groundwater wells that might be really close to the stream. The closer the well is to the stream, the more of an impact it may have on water availability in the stream. So reducing or staggering diversions. If there is a frost protection event, maybe staggering the timing so we don't have all of the wells turning on at the same time and depleting the stream. Looking at alternative frost protection methods, kind of using the Russian River watershed as maybe a template or an example. So some alternatives could be maybe installing fans or running fans or heaters. We're open to other solutions and frost protection methods there. We're still evaluating different methods and seeing what's practical, what's economical, what's feasible, and what's needed. Pump backs, we've talked to a few community members who have wells, and they seem open to possibly pumping groundwater into the stream. We can do that. So that would be a permit would be needed for that through the Central Valley Water Board. But there are kind of streamlined general order permits, like a low threat, limited threat discharge permit. So we do have some options there that we're evaluating. We would need to evaluate water quality before we could approve that, but that is a possible idea. And at this time, we're open to suggestions. It's part of why we're having this listening session. We want to hear from members of the community to see what's feasible, what's practical, and what's possible. And maybe there's other ideas out there we haven't considered yet. Next slide, please. So if we pause here and really just, evaluate everything we've learned so far, everything we need to know, and try to chart a path forward. So we know the hitch is in trouble. The Clear Lake hitch has kind of been, we have research going back to about the 50s when the hitch started having threats. So the water board is early in this effort, but impacts to the hitch is not a new phenomenon. And so even if we do have a good wet year this year, the worry is this could be like last year. Maybe last night's rain is the last precipitation event we'll see for another 9 months, which is kind of a similar situation to what we saw last year. And this is California. We're going to have drought years, we're going to have dry years, we're going to have wet years. So we have momentum right now. We've identified, the problem. We're moving on it. We're collecting data. We're collaborating, reaching out, trying to identify short-term and long-term solutions. But we can't lose this momentum. We don't want the hitch going extinct on our watch, and want to do everything we can to protect and identify long-term solutions. So we are early in the effort. We have a lot of questions. We have some possible solutions that we need to vet a little bit more. But at the end of the day, we can't let uncertainty lead to extinction. We need to work with what we have and work with members of the community to identify viable solutions. So next slide. So data needs. Val touched on a lot of these already, so I won't go too in depth into these, but things we do need. So we need groundwater well locations and proximity to streams. As I mentioned, the closer to a stream a well is, the shallower it's screened, the more of an impact it might have on the stream. So we want to evaluate that. We want to look at existing water rights and seeing what diversion volumes are being consumed and where those are located and possible impacts those could have downstream. Looking at groundwater quality, and as I mentioned, the pump back projects, looking at stream gauges, possibly installing some stream gauges with other state agencies or with our own resources. And we're also looking for, historical records or logs of fish kills and fish rescues. So we would welcome any of that kind of information, a date that you observed a fish kill or a date that you performed some fish rescues. We would be very interested in that kind of data. And whether or not it correlates with cold events, possibly frost protection events. So we're interested in that. And I'll say we want to start collecting data this year. So maybe some diverters might not have this data on hand. So this is something we were hoping to get a firmer grasp on this year as we develop long-term solutions. So these kind of parameters are going to be some key things we want to look for this year as we enter the hitch spawning season. And it's very possible we're going to need some other data, or we have other questions we haven't thought about yet. So we're hoping for some feedback from the community here. Next slide. So as a regulatory agency out of Sacramento, we don't live in the community. We're not there every day. So we really need your help. We need help coordinating and collaborating, spreading the word. We're having a few of these listening sessions. We're going to be doing quite a few field visits, possibly some stream gauging activities, possibly some enforcement investigations, taking a look at key tributaries and streams and trying to get a better grasp of issues and ways we can address those. So we need you to share the message. I saw some things in the chat earlier. These webinars are being posted to Facebook and other various social media platforms. Please keep doing that. We've established a website, an email address. You'll have our contact information, I think, at the end of this PowerPoint. So feel free to reach out. Feel free to share this information. This presentation will be recorded. We'll be able to provide a link soon, hopefully within a week or so, hopefully by the end of the week. Share the word. We're going to be presenting at various stakeholder meetings too moving forward. So we'll be in the community. Let your neighbors know. start collecting data from wells, from diversions. Let us know if you need any help or if you're not sure what that entails. We're happy to help. And we're also trying to look at, who needs the most help. And that could be, financial resources. We're looking into possible grant opportunities, drought funding opportunities to help some of those who don't have as many resources. So like those small farms that don't have necessarily the capital to implement alternative frost protection measures, for example. And we're also looking into permitting or streamlining permits for possible storage or long-term storage, so we don't have to rely so much on groundwater at an instant point in time. Next slide, please. So as I said, so this is California and we are a regulatory agency. So we are looking at regulatory options as we move forward, 2024 and beyond. But to get there, we have to collect a lot of data. We have to convince our board. We're hoping that that'll be a collaborative environment. We definitely welcome feedback from the community on proposed regulatory actions. But we really need good data first. We need good science. So we're looking at diversions, we're looking at groundwater use, we're looking at groundwater surface water interaction and what sort of extent that has. We're working on enforcement actions in the background, and we're coordinating with a lot of agencies. So we have state agencies like Fish and Wildlife, Department of Water Resources, federal agencies like the United States Geological Survey and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're working with the local tribes, collecting and collaborating on data. We're working with growers and grower coalitions to try to collaborate and see what's feasible out there. Maybe we can use the Russian River frost protection regulations as a template or an example or a lessons learned kind of approach as we look at Clear Lake area, knowing that Clear Lake isn't necessarily Russian River. We don't know if what worked in Russian River will work in Clear Lake, but we are, evaluating and hoping for some longer term solutions to protect the hitch moving forward. Next slide. So at this point, I will hand it back over to Jessica to close us out.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I just have a couple more things to touch on for folks before we get into our discussion section. I just want to give a wrap up of what we've done so far. You've heard some of it here, but since the emergency summit in early December, we've been collecting and analyzing available data. We've also been engaging with the local tribes. We've also been coordinating with state, federal, and local agencies. And then we've been doing some community engagement, just really in a fact-finding mode right now. And so these are some of the, just some of the folks we've been working with. Next slide, please. And then really just looking for what we need from you right now is really a commitment to some specific voluntary actions. You've heard some of those. I'm sure you've seen a theme. We're looking for things like reducing diversions and pumping, possibly alternative frost protection methods, if that's an option. Another thing is coordinating diversions and pump timing, but also maybe looking for people to become a local coordinator who can help make these things happen or keep up our momentum. Please, we're looking for you to share data with us so we can help answer questions. Also looking to connect with the hard to reach folks that maybe could have an impact on this effort, but maybe just aren't aware of it or need a little bit of help connecting with us. And then again, inviting us to other meetings. Next slide, please. So that wraps up again our presentation. And now what we want to move into for our we're calling it questions, answers, comments, discussion. Again, it's kind of broad. We're very open to hearing what you have to say in regards to the information we've presented today and looking for your ideas as well. A few things that we're asking you to keep in mind too that we'd like to hear about specifically is what would you do to solve the problem? Many of you have been engaged in this effort for a long time, and I'm sure you have ideas. And so we'd like to know what short and long-term strategies do you think would be helpful for you? I'm going to jump down and say we're also looking at specific steps the state should take. So again, we represent the State Water Board and we have a certain role, but we are coordinating with our other partner agencies. And so we want to make sure we're collecting all ideas and solutions. And then we also want to know what your barriers are. to helping to come up with solutions? Is it cost, feasibility? Is it the unknown that we don't have data, or difficulty coordinating? Maybe there's something else. So again, these are the things that we are thinking about. And again, for just as a reminder, for this section that we're moving into, you have a lot of different options. We do have some questions and comments that have come in through the chat. And so I might ask Eric to let us know kind of where we stand with those, if it looks like there's a topic we should start with. Otherwise, you're welcome to raise your hand. We can invite you to share verbally with us. Or ask questions verbally. You can also type into the chat, and we can have staff read off if you're not comfortable sharing verbally. So
I think there's two things to flag in the chat. There have been a couple of questions about how to make, excuse me, complaints, and we have put that information into the chat. So please take a look there. There's a link directly on the board's website. You can also just Google California Environmental Protection Agency complaint, and it should take you right directly to the website. So there's a couple different ways. If you go through the Cal EPA website, it does come to us. We are prioritizing this workload, and that should be direct. The other thing I think is about funding, and whether or not there are funding opportunities. Marina from Lake County, not to put you on the spot, but you did provide some information on Department of Water Resources, technical support services, and funding availability there. I think that also as an action item coming out of this meeting, and also from some of the meetings we've had previously, one of the things that we should do and that we'll commit to doing is pulling together just a quick fact sheet. I know that these exist in some other places, but maybe links to existing funding services. These are primarily going to be existing state grant opportunities. There are usually requirements associated with those opportunities, and there are usually, some timelines and administrative requirements that go with those. But they are a great source of funding, and even though we're in a bit of a budget crunch this year, there's still a lot of money left over from last year, and that's still out there and available. So we'll commit to doing that in the next couple of days, and then get that up on our website and post it around with our sister agencies and make that available.
great.
Let's see, we also have, I'll just kind of go through some of the questions that we have to see if there's anybody that does want to pick these up. So looking through the chat, could someone provide more details, RE, a local community coordinator? Is this a voluntary or paid position? Hours per week, reporting to whom, how, into position, is there a position description? I don't know if Jessica, you want to take that, or I can take a run at it too.
Sorry, I was listening and I missed a little bit of the intro on that. But in terms of a local coordinator, what we're looking for is someone who's willing to step up for something like that. At this point, for this year, this would just be a voluntary position. We don't have a position opening where there would be paid. It would be a completely volunteer position. And that is something that we could explore funding opportunities for a position like that, but it wouldn't happen this year. So it would be something that we'd be looking for likely later on down the line. And I think Eric mentioned this, but just to reiterate, funding just takes a lot longer. So unless there's a local funding solution, for example, if there was a group of folks who was interested in providing some funding to put towards that, that's certainly something that can be done on the local level. But we are looking for folks who are willing to do that. Eventually, perhaps for monitoring, there could be funding opportunities for that. But really, this is just looking for folks that are willing to voluntarily this year step up to kind of be someone who can help coordinate those things. We don't know exactly what that looks like either. We have some ideas. For example, John mentioned the Russian River Frost Protection. They have a coalition, and they've come together locally and coordinated and then worked with their Farm Bureau as well to do that. And that is something where the participants all pay a small fee into it, and that's what goes to basically run the program. and that helps them to balance monitoring and identifying when people are using and scheduling when folks can do different things. Sorry, Eric, if you wanted to add into that at all, or if that's good.
No, I think that's a great start. And there's a follow-up comment in the chat that this would be a ton of work and it's not feasible for a volunteer to do. And I think that's a fair point. And maybe just to reiterate that what we're looking for now is people that can really just help carry the message forward this year. Recognize that we're not going to be able to spin up a full-fledged position with funding and authority in the couple weeks that we have this year that we're really focusing on, weeks and months. But in the longer term, that's something that I think is really worth exploring. And if there's interest in it, let us know. I think that we do want to expand that conversation further. There's a couple of questions talking about the role of county government has in stream bed management. Who is responsible to identify and remove barriers, and is it being done? There's a couple of additional questions that are related. Short-term, clear the tributaries, Clover Creek, Blackberries, Middle Creek vegetation and sediment, and noting that it's not happening now. And then long-term, assist county or influence the powers that be to expedite and assist county with Middle Creek restoration project. And then another idea is to put resources on illicit grows which are going unchecked. So I think that the first part maybe let's touch on is the stream bed maintenance actions. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in from the board side of things to update that.
I guess I can touch on that. Yeah, so that's something we are looking into right now. The interaction between the stream bed maintenance and water needed is a pretty strong one, because hitch, they don't jump over barriers. So if you have a lot of barriers, fish can migrate when there's a lot of water, but they cannot migrate when there's not a lot of water. If you remove those barriers, it takes a lot less water to move the fish up and down the streams. So we actually think this might be a critical issue, and it's an issue that seems to be agreed on by a lot of different groups. We're not just hearing this from one group. This is a pretty strong narrative that barriers are a problem. There are some complications with structures that are inappropriate. We need, and this is something that would take years to fix, right? And maybe there's some grant funding to build a new culvert that would prevent gravel from building up at sort of the entrance of the culvert and causing a gap. And so there might be some grant funding for something like that, and that's a big project, and we want to talk to the county about that sort of thing. There's some maintenance issues. There's some clearing out of the gravel as the streams get really big. They move gravel downstream, and it can get stuck at these road crossings and whatnot. And so there are some, I think, longstanding agreements to do maintenance in the channels. Whose responsibility is it? I'm not sure. I think it's probably the responsibility of a lot of different groups and entities. There are also some permitting complications. This is not something that we permit. So we are hoping to provide some guidance to private landowners and, have a conversation with CDFW and the county and anybody else that would be involved in the permitting to see if there's any way that we can expedite some of these projects in the near term, and then look at long-term solutions. I guess that's all I'll say about it. Like, that's something we would really love to see done in the short term if it's feasible, if the permitting can be sorted out. But we also think that that's a long-term solution and something that we're willing to try to facilitate and point people towards sources for money and whatnot.
Can I just jump in for a second too? I see a lot of people providing comments in the chat, and I do encourage folks. I think we have a couple of hands raised too. We might want to call on them before we change subjects to see if we're going that way, because it would be nice to hear maybe a little bit more context. You can only get so much in a chat. So if we wanted to call on folks, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm having trouble opening my panelist list. I just see their hands raised.
Yeah, like Lois, I'm also having trouble identifying if people have raised their hand.
Maybe is it Haji? Is that correct?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Haji Wharf. I'm a property owner in Upper Lake, near the confluence of Alley Creek and Clover Creek, which then go on to dump out at Middle Creek. And during this latest storm, we had unbelievable flooding over our road here because the levees are so shallow in comparison to the creek beds. It didn't take much before the water flowed right over the levees, flooded the road, went into the nearby vineyards, and we could have easily been stranded back here. And so I think that's a critical issue, is maintenance of the levees. And I've called the county and they say it's not their responsibility. I don't know who else to call, but there's trees in the middle of the creek, and on the levee themselves, it's not been maintained at all. I've been on this property for almost 15 years and I've seen it mowed maybe once and dredged by the Alley Creek Bridge that goes over Pitney Lane once or twice in all those years. And it's just not going to cut it. And I've seen hitch in Alley Creek, but that creek dries up pretty rapidly because it's so shallow. Now there's a portion of Clover Creek, I don't know, I think I have surface water rights to it. My property goes right to the middle of Clover Creek and on the south end of my property. And it's heavily shaded and retains water year round. But further down towards Middle Creek, it dries up. So I think that might be a source of stranding. I'm not sure. I haven't gone back there to look, but there's water year round back there. Whereas other places, you know, it dries up. Now, the real reason why I wanted to talk about this situation is because I'm at the confluence of these two creeks, we have a very, very high water table. I have green grass year round, and that's due to my well artesianing. I think one novel idea would be to identify wells that are artesian for months at a time. Mine spews water until May or June, and I do not capture this water currently. It just forms vernal pools all over my property and stays wet, which is really quite an inconvenience to me because the grass gets tall, mosquitoes, and you know, I can't get to it until it dries up in summer. So if you could identify properties, I know at least 2 or 3 right here adjacent to me that have artesianing wells well into late spring, and somehow coordinate capturing that excess water. And then you were talking about a pumping back into the streams kind of situation later in spring. That would be great because the water is free. Nobody's using it. It's just an inconvenience for property owners. It's something to think about as a source of water.
Okay, great. Thank you. So in terms of, I did figure out, thanks to the assistance of some staff, how to find the hands raised. So I'll give a little bit of a heads up of our next couple of questions. We have a question in the chat about illicit cannabis grows, and then after that, we'll go to Peter Windrum with his hand up. So the first question is related to illicit grows, and I'm actually looking for it again. Another idea is to put resources on illicit grows which are going unchecked. Illicit grows are more than likely conducting illegal diversions as well. This is relating or resulting in conflict downstream. And I don't know if Taro, if you're on, if you can address any kind of high level overview of what you're doing with illicit grows. If you're not on, then I'll jump in and do it, or maybe turn it over to John.
Sure. Yeah, I think Taro's an attendee, so we might have to give Mike permission. But big picture while we're figuring that out, and feel free to jump in, Taro. Yes, we are looking at illegal grows throughout the state, actually. So Taro's unit is the enforcement section that looks at cannabis grows, legal and legal. Most of their attention's on illegal grows, of course, and so they are aware of Lake County illegal grows, and they're looking into potentially illegal diversions associated with cannabis grows. Can't speak about active investigations, but they are looking into Lake County, assuming illicit grows in this case is cannabis associated.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Peter Windrum, your hand was up, and we'd like to turn it over to you to see if you have any additional input or questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Just very quickly, I'm the past president of the Chai Council from the Clear Lake Hitch and served in that capacity from 2004 until last year. Also a vineyardist on and own and operate vineyards on Kelsey Creek for the last 50 years. Anyhow, a couple of things I want to encourage you very much to go back and double check the proposition or the contention that groundwater pumping affects Kelsey Creek. And the reason is, I'll just state these facts very quickly. The hitch spawning time typically runs from somewhat in February, but basically March, April, and mid-May. That's a total of 76 days, if you will. Groundwater pumping, the pumping we do for frost protection, takes place on average of 6 nights out of that entire period of time, 6 nights. And typically is 12 hours. In other words, 6 hours filling a reservoir, 6 hours actually doing the frost protection. That amount of pumping is 4% of the time covering the entire hitch spawning season, just 4%. And the proposition that 4% pumping draws down the flows in Kelsey Creek is not supported, and if you will, be refuted by the readings of the 2 gauges on Kelsey Creek, the USGS gauge and the DWR gauge, one upstream, one downstream. So I ask you to go back and double check your data, look at this question again, and please don't accept somehow as gospel that groundwater pumping is affecting the flows in Kelsey Creek, certainly in Kelsey Creek, and I don't know about others. It just doesn't add up that it does so. So thank you very much.
Thanks. I think that raises a broader question. We've heard the claim that frost protection and pumping for frost protection just really doesn't occur very frequently in Big Valley and some of the other watersheds. What that doesn't get at is whether there's other irrigation going on, other pumping for other purposes or needs. We just don't know. We've gotten reports that there is irrigation going on at times unrelated to frost protection or presumably unrelated to frost protection, and when temperatures are greater than 32 degrees, and that's one of the comments in the chat farther down. It raises the potential for the need for additional information, and that is a potential regulatory step that the board, just to be very upfront and very clear, is considering. The need for an information order to get more information on well locations, surface water diversions at a more timely interval, maybe a more frequent reporting resolution, and some pumping data on wells where, again, I think kind of focused on the 5 streams that were highlighted earlier. It's by no means certain, but otherwise we very quickly get into questions of who's using what water, when is it being used, in kind of this combat science a little bit that makes it very difficult to figure out how to move forward. We need some of that information and we really don't have it. So stay tuned on that end. I think that's something that we're still exploring, and we'll definitely provide more information in the near future. I just want to raise that possibility here and now. Let's see.
If I can add to that,
Yeah, please
Eric.
do. Yep.
Yeah, so on the groundwater surface water interaction, we're trying to take a close look at that as well. So we're doing some kind of rough models, if you will, to look at, if a well is 100 feet from the stream and it's screened to 150 feet, what kind of impact does that have? And then like 1,000 feet, up to 1,000 feet. So we're doing some of those kind of modeling efforts. We have a Sigma group in the Water Board, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act group. And so they're helping us out with that. We're also trying to obtain some model parameters from the GSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan that was submitted in pursuant to Sigma. So we are looking at surface water stream, groundwater surface water interaction. We're trying to take a close look at that as well.
All right, I think next up with their hand up, Julia, no last name.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Thank you, Julia Carrera, environmental scientist. In regards to barriers, I think Supervisor Crandall and Haji spoke a little bit about Middle Creek and the Middle Creek diversion and the levees. The hitch used to come up the Middle Creek diversion all the way up past Elk Mountain and a road into Haji's area. They didn't come up this year. It's due to the overgrowth of trees and shrubs and blackberry bushes and the extensive amount of gravel. And to me, that's the barrier. If we can clean out, as Supervisor Crandall said, Middle Creek and the Middle Creek diversion, that would be helpful. But the other component to this is the levee system. There was a feasibility study done, funded by the Water Board, I believe, that says that these levees are leaching out water. So there's some serious challenges and barriers that need to be quickly addressed. I have grave concern about the conditions of our levee systems, both for the hitch and for the residents of Upper Lake. So much so that I've invested a large amount of money in pumping, sandbags, and water walls. So I hope that everybody can really look at the fact that we're kind of sitting ducks here in Upper Lake as residents for an imminent flood, and it's scary, and that's not going to help the hitch. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up, Sharon Zoller. And then after that will be Will Weiss.
Sharon, are you there? Why don't we go on to Will and we can come back to Sharon?
Okay, Will Weiss.
Hi there, can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Eric and others. Thank you again for hosting this session and for giving us an opportunity to chime in. Fearing that we were going to move to another topic before I got a chance to speak, I actually just typed more or less what I was planning to say into the webinar chat, but I'll just read it aloud so everyone can save themselves the trouble. So just wanted to note that timing of non-frost irrigation is probably not as crucial a factor affecting stream flows as we've been discussing here. This is based only on farming experience in Lake County, but there are very few, perhaps zero, crops grown in the area that are not pears, wine grapes, and walnuts. And therefore, it would sort of seem unlikely anyway that there would be a demand for irrigation for other types of crops at that time of year. It's typically, if it's getting down to freezing, other crops wouldn't really be able to get started, at least typically during that time of year. But anyway, frost pumping for sure is the factor that if we're going to talk about it, could be in play here. I don't think that the amount of water being used for other types of irrigation at that time of year during hitch runs is substantial. That was mostly my chime in on this.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I'm looking, are there other hands raised? I don't see any currently.
Or is Sharon back with us? Nope.
Sharon Zoller, are you there? Can you hear us? All right, I don't hear anything at this time.
This is Will Weiss once more. I still have the ability to speak, which would seem to suggest that Sharon does not. So I'm just letting you know that I'm still able to mute and unmute myself, and that was not the case when others were talking.
No, thank you. I can see that she is unmuted, but doesn't look like there's any kind of response at this time.
Well, Sharon, if we're not able to get to you, you can always email us as well with your information if you can't access the chat or use your Zoom functions.
Okay, a couple more notes in the chat, and I'll kind of run through those quickly. Donna McKenziewicz, and if I mispronounced that, apologies in advance, notes that as a volunteer resident in the CLO Keys area at Schindler Creek, there's an offer to help monitor, seeking grant funding to restore Schindler to help with hitch survival. Are there training videos online? I don't know, is there anybody that could respond to that question? Perhaps one of the other participants or viewers.
I saw a hand up from the Farm Bureau. Is that something?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I typed my response in the chat in regards to that question from Donna. Clerk, the Clear Lake Environmental Research Center actually runs a voluntary hitch observation program. So I put the link to that in the chat, but I would encourage anybody who is interested in being a part of hitch monitoring to look into that and inquire with them. It's fairly easy, and they have several resources on their website, including trainings on that. So that's a resource for anybody who is looking for that would like to use that. Was there anything else specifically that you felt I could address, or?
Well, I think that's fantastic. I may ask another question of the audience. We do have an email distribution system. We call it a LIRIS, but that's just our kind of internal name, and we can blast out emails for people that are signed up to the distribution system list. But if that's something of interest, we can send out a blast through the LIRIS list about that training session and let us know. We're happy to do so, post it on our website as well.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I wanted to speak to really briefly, there was a question about landowner responsibility for cleaning up any barriers that may pose a threat to the hitch. And so I just wanted to share that, to my knowledge, for county-owned property and areas of these tributaries, the county actually holds the LSA. So they have authority over those cleanups occurring. So if that's an action that the community wants to see, they should encourage and push the county to do so, because they do have the authority to do so. As far as landowners' responsibility, if somebody has a barrier on their property, that would be their responsibility. I think issues in the past that I've heard of from non-farm landowners and farmland owners would be that the permitting has been disastrous, right? I mean, you're able to satisfy portions of a permit, and then either the county impedes or another agency has impeded. So I think that that's been general source of concern, but that's you as staff are also looking to resolve that through some expedited permitting options. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's extremely helpful. And I think that is a major takeaway from both this meeting and some of the meetings we held last week, that anything that the board can help do to help either facilitate some of this permitting or just bring everyone together and help figure out what we can do and how we need to actually do it. That's going to be a major thing that we can work on and a major priority for us. So I'm hopeful that we'll have some additional information in the next couple of weeks on that topic. I know CDFW is on the call, and they've actually also put in some chats, information on funding on restoration projects, and a huge thank you for doing that. So stay tuned. I think message received loud and clear that we need to, if not, you do education, outreach, engagement, and facilitation of the stream maintenance efforts, recognizing that there's different agencies with different responsibilities, and I think we can all figure out and prioritize and work together. I also noted that Sarah, Ryan, you posted that the tribe is doing some training as well, and you reached out directly to Donna. So if there's other information that we can send out through that Lyra system as well, please do let us know. We can compile that, put it together. You have your hand up. Do you want to speak to it?
Sure, just briefly. Thank you, Eric. Yes, the tribes are getting ready for the spawning season, and we are pulling together our forms, our methodologies, our protocol, basically. And we're also going to open it up to other local community members if they want to have some similar, especially along their properties, but similar data collection. And we're going to be, you don't even have to have any equipment really. It's just we're going to be, our forms are going to have some vegetation data collection, as well as once the water starts drawing down, when you start seeing pools in the creeks. And right now we've got one of our the environmental director over at Habematol is working on an online survey thing that people can put on their phones. So we'll be reaching out to and letting the community know about this as well, so they can participate if they'd like, which would include like an in-person training to just kind of go through all of that. We'll be doing all of this within the next month, and it will be also to be tracking hitch. So we'll be talking about how to tell if it's a hitch or blackfish or sucker. People can have mistakenly identify those. So we'll have it be thorough like that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, and there's some other information in the chat about whether the clerk program is still operating. So we'll reach out and we'll see what the status is. And Sarah, thank you for the additional information for the upcoming training that you identified. Let's see, a question about how to tell where county versus state property is in the Clear Lake Oak Keys. I think that's probably outside the scope of what we can cover in this meeting. Some additional information on clerk. I'm reading the chats as we go through, but you're typing faster than I can read through. Anyone else with their hand up that would like to ask a question directly, please raise your hand.
I do want to note to folks too that if we don't get to your questions, we are definitely going to be taking all of these down, and we will try to find answers and respond to you as well, especially if we have your contact information. So please note that if we miss it because they're coming through quickly, that's why. And Eric, it does look like there's one here that we do have some knowledge of, or we have some folks on the call that can, but it says it appears hitch spawn in only a few tributaries. Is this true historically, or did they use other streams as well? And I think we know that they did use other streams as well. Is there anyone who wants to speak to that component? And again, it can be staff, or it could also be some of our other folks on the call.
I'm happy to let someone else who knows more than I do speak about this, but my understanding is, yes, they did spawn in every other tributary. And I think in that graphic I showed with the red and the orange creeks are just where they're spawning today. The blue creeks are where I understand that they historically spawned, which is kind of everywhere. So, but I'm not the expert. Someone here might be the expert.
All right, not seeing anyone. I think Janine Pfeiffer, you had posted hitch historically spawned in every tributary leading to Clear Lake. And then humbly, not an expert, just a PhD ecology studying the issue. I don't know if there's a better definition of expert, but yeah, seems pretty qualified on my end. Let's see. Some addition, in case notes were not made about the topic, a potential source of pump back into creeks during low flow spawning years could be identify property owners with artesian springs or wells and to use that as a pump back option. And that has been noted, and we will reach and follow up. I think we do want to consider like what's the volume. Thing with artesian wells and springs is that sometimes you can actually support local ecosystems with those springs, and so pumping those directly back into the system might not have the same benefit as, say, hooking up a deeper irrigation well. Just something to consider as we consider that process going forward. Let's see. Marina, Lake County has a Clear Lake Hitch page that reports on data, including 2014 spawning survey, and it's routinely updated with best available data and updates. Thank you. And then there's a link to that information in the chat. And again, likewise, Marina, if there's anything that you'd like us to issue to the website or through Lyris, please do let us know. I think one of the things that we do want to do with our website is start to compile some of this. I know that it probably has been compiled by others, and that's an ongoing challenge that there's a lot of folks working on this effort in action. We definitely don't want to duplicate resources or activities that are already underway, but if that's helpful and we can serve as kind of a centralizing agent or a repository, happy to do so and can post it on the website. Let's see. A number of residents, Scotts Valley and Scotts Creek, have wells at artesian for a long period of time. Do hitch only return to natal streams, or could habitat restoration and additional tributaries be of assistance? I don't know if that's something that someone else, a participant, might like to respond to. And Philip, Janine has already responded to you both. Yes, thank you. Deborah has asked a question. Is there any data on the impacts of gravel mining in creek beds? I can say from my end that anecdotally, we've heard that this is an issue. I don't know if there's anybody that can speak to it more than that.
Yeah, it's mostly been anecdotal to this point. I know the Central Valley Water Board does have a couple waste discharge requirement permits to allow discharge from mining sites. I think some of them has the gravel site. So we do have some involvement in the mining activities, but that's our knowledge of the mining is still in its infancy.
And so if there is data there, please do let us know. Go ahead, please. Yep.
Yeah, this is Peter. As to the gravel mining, I can respond to that. There is one permitted gravel mining site. It's very small, but it's up Scotts Creek. That's it. But the legacy of gravel mining is just appalling. And taking Kelsey Creek, every creek has had major gravel mining on it in years past, starting with Middle Creek, Scotts Creek, coming on even Adobe Creek, and particularly in Kelsey Creek. One of the consequences of the gravel mining in Kelsey Creek is that upstream from the Main Street Bridge in Kelseyville, the gravel has been stripped away. This is not from gravel mining, but the consequence of downstream gravel mining is this gravel has been stripped out of the bed for approximately 3 miles, such that there's now just a clay bottom, and there's no spawning can take place in that clay bottom. Restoration of the streams compensating for these kinds of catastrophes really has to be the #1 priority in my view. Yeah, removing barriers so hitch can get up to historic spawning grounds, but then also restoration of creeks. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're kind of running out of questions. And so with that, maybe let's turn to just kind of a wrap up and then articulation of any action items that I think we're emerging with here. First off, I just want to say thank you for all the attendees today. I thought this was an extremely productive meeting, and the articulation of the challenges and just the potential next steps is immensely helpful. I think there are some specific things that we can take actions on in just the next couple of days. I'm going to kind of rattle these off, and hopefully somebody on our end is taking notes in case we miss something. And then all my kids and dogs are coming home from school right now, so it might get momentarily noisy. The first is sending out any information on the LIRIS related to training opportunities for either monitoring, citizen monitoring, or hitch identification, and then updating our website to also include that information and just other general things that we have that could be of use or of general interest. The next action item would be compilation of potential funding opportunities. I think this is a multi-agency kind of action, and we'll follow up again. And I think we have a check-in meeting in a couple of days. Let's prioritize talking through that then, and then making that information just more generally available and sending it out through the LIRIS again and putting it on our website where it's appropriate. The third action item would be, I think, to do what we can to maybe pull together some information. I don't know if it's an FAQ. I want to think about it a little bit, but how do we articulate the stream maintenance questions that have come up today? I think, we had a couple of different questions that do lend themselves to an FAQ. How do you do it? Who's responsible? Who pays? What's the permitting timelines? These kind of general things. And those will be helpful, but then also maybe convening and working with other agencies as appropriate and the county as appropriate to identify some clear next steps, and if there are barriers or challenges, how we can address those early on. I think it does help this year that we have gotten all the rain, because there are higher flows right now, and that's going to naturally serve as a bit of a barrier reduction agent. But then, like John mentioned early on, this could be the last bit of rain we get for the next 9 months. So we don't want to just sit back and let that rest. We want to be available and kind of plan out what we need to do. Are there other action items that I didn't articulate? Those are the things that kind of pop into my head after this conversation.
I think just in general, we're going to be going through pretty carefully with the chat and the notes we've been taking as well to identify future ones. I will say, I think some of these are not necessarily under our purview, and it's going to require a lot of coordination. So I'm hoping that we can help to get folks in touch as well. So that's why I encourage people to sign up for the our email subscription list and keep in touch on that one. John, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it might already be done, but we're going to correct the link for the next listening session on February 1st, and we'll resend that out and update our website. Sorry about that again.
Yeah, actually, if you want to go to the next slide, Ben, please. So the links actually have been corrected. So they have been redirected, again, the original links. Unfortunately, some of the passcodes and the meeting IDs were incorrect. So we're revising the notice. I do apologize again for that. We'll get that going. But just to let you know, we'll be doing another run of this meeting on February 1st. So we can capture more folks. We're also going to be at the Lake County Board of Supervisors meeting this coming Tuesday. And please, if you want to have more of a discussion with us on this topic, reach out. That we would ask that, invite us to other meetings, to groups of folks who are interested. We're very eager and making time for that. So please, if you are interested in that, let us know. We've already started meeting with some folks, but that's a key thing. Eric, did you want to? weigh in?
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic, and really emphasizing, if you do want to have additional conversations, please email us, please ask. We want to have those conversations too. I think the other thing that we are interested in is, we did state early on, what is the ask? And for those that are able to or willing to say, here's a concrete action I'm willing to do, that we'd like to start to compile some of these actions and put them up on our website and say, here are the steps that people are taking right now. It's always hard to be first, and maybe you don't want your information up on the website, and that's fine too. We don't have to do that, but I do think that the more people see that there are others out there willing to take that step, the easier it becomes for them as well. And so that is something that we are looking to do over the next couple of weeks and months. And if you are willing to do something like that, please email us and let us know. I think that was everything I had. Jessica, anything else? John, Valerie?
Do you have one last thing that I'm hoping folks can just take maybe 10 seconds to help us with? Is we do have a poll, and if you're able to respond to the poll, we'll just leave that open for folks. If you could click on that as you leave. I'm hoping everyone can see that, our attendees. And then the final slide, please, Ben. Oh, and of course, we're getting a failed to launch polling error. So it would, a good way to wrap up a rough beginning is a rough ending, right? So really, we just want to know that this was a useful session for you is what we were asking. So if you can see it, great. Oh, it looks like some people are getting that now, fantastic. But again, here's our website, our email updates. You can sign up at the bottom of the website. If you included your email here with us, we'll go ahead and just sign you up on our end. And of course, you can email your questions to our Clear Lake Hitch. And we look forward to working with you more on this. Thank you so much.